Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the NARM Training Institute. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. Hi, Transforming Trauma listeners. If you're a licensed mental health professional working with complex trauma and are interested in learning the neuroaffective relational model, we're excited to share with you about our upcoming NARM therapist trainings. The Level 2 NARM therapist training is a clinical training designed for licensed mental health professionals, current mental health graduate students, and active clinical interns and trainees, where you will get trained in a comprehensive developmental framework and clinical approach for resolving the long-term impacts of ACEs and CPTSD. As you are learning and integrating NARM, you will receive individualized support from a team of skilled, passionate, and supportive trainers led by NARM senior faculty Brad Kammer. If you're interested in learning to support the healing of complex trauma, we encourage you to register now to reserve your spot. For more information and to register, please visit www.narmtraining.com/schedule. And now for our interview. Adam Angel is a clinical social worker with over 15 years of experience working with youth, adults, and families. Adam obtained his MSW at Howard University in Washington, D.C., and he specializes in working with developmental trauma and paternal mental health. He also facilitates a number of multi-stage fatherhood groups online. Adam lives in Silver Spring, Maryland, with his wife, 2 kids, and their dog. Please enjoy this conversation with Adam Angel. All right. I'm looking forward to this conversation today. I'm here with Adam Angel. Welcome to Transforming Trauma.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so happy for you to join us. You and I had an opportunity to connect briefly last week, and I have so many questions I'm looking forward to exploring with you today. But to start, I'll ask you, what is it that you would like listeners to get out of our conversation today?
I would love for folks to feel more understanding and new possibilities around NARM and also just specifically for parents and how they can utilize the skills of NARM, and also for parents that are maybe not practitioners, just thinking about how they can have more understanding and compassion for themselves. And then I think if more specifically for fathers in particular, that's been a lot of my work.
Great. I'm really excited because I think that this is an area, especially in focusing on fathers and their relationship with their children, how needed those resources are. So I'm really excited that in the NARM context, you are providing that, and I'm excited to dive in today. So if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about yourself and where you are, where you're located, what kind of work you're doing.
Sure. I'm in the greater Washington, D.C. area, specifically Silver Spring, Maryland, and been working in the field of sort of social work and so on, I guess 18, 19 years. Most of that time was in nonprofit world doing community work. And so I had some familiarity with complex trauma for sure, but maybe a little bit different understanding of it. And then I started sort of in the pandemic go into private practice and started working with particularly fathers, and including the work I do just generally for folks with developmental trauma. I'm also just supporting dads on a number of levels. So these groups that I'm facilitating, there's one for perinatal loss and one for dads that are new fathers. And then that's more of a peer support group. And then there's therapy groups that are a little deeper dive. We call it Dads 2.0. Then there's a couple of very specific ones for fathers that are interested in getting support for children that are in the preschool stage. And finally, I'm working on some things for co-parents and supporting differences in parenting styles and how to kind of have conversations around that.
So in this work that you're doing, I'm curious how you're holding the term complex trauma. How do you see that, and how do you kind of define that?
Yeah, as I was mentioning before, when I was first training, we're talking about 2006 or something, I remember being drawn to the idea of CPTSD, but it was from this other lens of really what I would name as shock trauma, but repeated shock trauma. And so that was, and of course the ACEs study and all that, that's a big part of how I used to define it. And then coming into NARM and then just so much wonderful training here that I received, just understanding that complex trauma as really being obviously relational and how that person perceives themselves as it relates to what is not available or available in their environment. And really just thinking about this more broadly, even to the point of, as we talk about men, the impact beyond just the family itself, but also in the community, and how an example would be around masculinity and how that's held and how that impacts us and as men and so on. So that's a little bit of my view on it.
And can you tell us really what led you to doing this kind of work and working with complex trauma?
Yeah, as I was doing my work in community work, I was doing some rites of passage work for young men over the years. And then as I was thinking about doing groups, basically there are a couple of different reasons, but one is that we lost in our first pregnancy pretty late, and so it was a stillbirth, and this really impacted me in terms of the support that wasn't available for men, in particular. And then I would say there's also a piece of just wanting to be a good father, which I think I was really fearful of. I don't know if I could name that at the time, but there was a lot of fear going into parenthood. Even though there was a lot of excitement about being a father, I was super excited. Never had a doubt I wanted to be one. And then at the same time, so COVID hit, and we had our second. And at that time, as we were going through so much at once, I also was training in somatic experiencing. And I think some of the things that I knew, so maybe on the surface level about attachment and so on, somehow deepened for me. And a lot of the personal work, the internal work for myself, really spoke to what I think I ended up seeing as like what may be needed for others. And so, there was a lot of grief there for me of what I didn't know before, how I may have shown up for my daughter in her first years, thinking about, okay, how do I do this better? And then as I was doing that, I was like, oh, wow, I'm sure not only is it COVID, but also this informing me of like, we need to do something here. I need to do something. So, put it out there. Didn't know if it was going to work. So starting my private practice at the same time, and kind of just built from there.
I'm just thinking of all the folks who during COVID, so many people were looking for resources and needing resources. And that particular topic and demographic, folks that you were working with, I'm just imagining the gratitude that folks are having, finding a resource like that. Wow. So you mentioned that you got NARM trained at some point. So what led you to get trained in NARM?
I remember finishing the first year of SE and thinking like, this is great. And I feel like there's something that I also want to pursue that was different. And it was actually I think it was at the bottom of an email for somatic experiencing. And I was strongly considering internal family systems as another option in terms of my training. And when I watched whatever it was, the intro that kind of like let you know what NARM's about, it just spoke to me on like a visceral level. And I said, okay, this is it. Like, I just don't know that I knew what I was looking for fully until I watched that. And then sort of subsequent trainings, each one sort of building on themselves, the same answer of like internally, just this yes. And I also feel like I was lucky in terms of timing because, we're in COVID. And so there was this availability to do it online. Yeah. And I was like part of that, which was really nice.
Wow. How did you move into working with fathers and this grief piece?
Well, I actually just put out like general stuff. And the joke is that when I put out like things for dads, I think I got like 1,000 emails from wives and clinicians, and none from fathers, and no follow-up either. And so I was like, how do I, get in here? And so we have a place called the Breastfeeding Center here of Greater Washington. It's a fantastic place for antenatal and prenatal classes. They didn't have anything for fathers, and they were looking for something. And I brought to them like this 10-week curriculum that I'd made during this time for new dads. Again, this is a peer support group, so it's not like deeper dive. I'm not necessarily using NARM here. It's more just like, every session we're talking like processing the birth in the first session, the second, maybe PMADs, which is sort of like all the mood and anxiety disorders that occur maybe for them, for others, and so on. And so each session was very structured, and in some way it mirrored what I thought I was needing to give the men there, was also showing up for me and my vulnerability or lack thereof. And so my personal work has sort of mirrored as I've been able to be more vulnerable in myself and have that availability for my clients. I've also been able to deepen the groups. And so that's been really nice to see. So I think including in the same group, right, in the same semi-structured group, we've been able to have deeper conversations and more willingness. And sometimes that's the men pushing me, which is great. And sometimes the men show up also very guarded. It depends on the group, right? Sure. So that's how it kind of evolved. So it started with this new dads group. I also, with some trepidation, spoke to someone about the perinatal loss group that was a man who was just really unique in that space. And he guided me and mentored me. And I created this sort of 6 week. It's also meant to be a peer support group because that way I can operate it sort of nationally. And a few men started coming to it, and it sort of developed from there. So those are the first two. And then I think based on some desire from some of the men in the new dads groups, I was able to open up the therapy groups and just figure out how do I utilize NARM here, which has been, trial and error a little bit.
So you opened it nationally. So these are peer support groups. Are they online? How do folks, join in?
Yeah, great question. So the peer support groups that are the new dads and a few of the others that are virtual, like the ones supporting dads that are with preschool age as well as the perinatal loss, those can be accessed virtually and anyone can join. I've had people from other countries to join. Actually, it's been really great as well. But most of the people that come are also coming from my area in the sort of Maryland, DC, Virginia.
So you did mention how you're weaving in NARM into the work that you're doing. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. First and foremost, I think, as you know, so much of this is about us as clinicians. So just really maintaining like what's going on for me in the 50-50 and just understanding what's happening for me in that space and just trying to be with them as, in the intersubjectivity, right? Just being with their experience, my experience. And I think in terms of how I'm utilizing specifically is that, I'll bring psychoeducation in, or, in terms of, the bind that we have as children and sort of reflect on that with them and see what comes up for them. At first, some of this felt a little choppy as I was actually co-facilitating the first versions of this with a colleague of mine who is trained in IFS. And I think partly that people were drawn because they knew what IFS is. And where I am, there's only about a handful of us in our area. And so, that was partly, we were able to work really well together because of our similar styles. And so just like this depathologizing model really allowed for that. And then I think like what ends up happening is what I'm doing is like being with whatever comes up for them and they're sharing. And then I'll ask if almost like in a fishbowl style, like if I can be with it a little deeper, if it's okay to be here for a little longer, just me and that person as other people take in what's happening between us. And so sometimes I'm able to get to all the pillars, asking many times like just helping them, but through this clarification process, through the intention process, as you've done today with me, and thinking about like, what is it they really want for themselves? And we may get to emotional completion, and some integration of what's going on for them. And that'll happen in front of others. And it can be, depending on the situation, maybe it'll take 7, 8 minutes, 9 minutes, and be able to do something with them right there. And then just to see what comes up for everyone else in the space as that happens. I think staying with the psychobiological shift, this is a little more challenging in the group environment. It's like, the deepening and deepening. But I think even just getting that taste, this really allows for really what happens for everyone else as they're watching that and how impactful that can be. So that's definitely a big part of it. And maybe one other thought that I had to share around this is that, sometimes the group will just be like, okay, well, what do we do today? I don't know if there's anything coming up for me. And I'll say, well, I'm wondering for everyone, as you came here today, what you're most wanting for yourself if you were to reflect on that. And that can be really just restart the group almost, just to sort of it reorganizes everyone.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just feeling appreciation right now again for the work that you're doing because I'm thinking about those moments when opening up and just sharing and the connection that can happen between the group members and how valuable that is in that setting. I too have had a loss. I lost twins.
I'm sorry.
And having experienced the group process like that, the groups I was a part of weren't NARM groups, but I'm just thinking of the vulnerability.
I would be happy to talk more deeply about that too. I think it's really, why should we hide it? Go away from it. I think it's exactly what someone might want to hear.
Yeah. And it's, for me, it's been almost 14 years. So these aren't tears it's not fresh. I'm really in this moment feeling so much appreciation for the work that you do. Yeah. Thank you for letting me just be a human and not just an interviewer.
Well, I wondered about if I was going to share that today. I wasn't sure if I was going to share that. But you know what? It's one of the reasons that you asked me a question. It's one of the reasons I did it. as that I said, like, this is not available. I wish
Right.
it had been available. I might not have gone, to be honest. I buried my shit so deep.
As we often do.
I was so
Mhm.
well, yeah, I
Mhm.
just couldn't handle it. It was very hard, but
Yeah. Yeah, it's just again, like I said, it's been 14 years for me, so it's not the grief isn't as fresh, but when I hear of folks who are going through it and it is fresh, knowing when they have resources is so there's a healing quality to that for me.
yeah, I think it's maybe helpful if I share a little more about my personal
Please,
experience and just
please.
we were at around 20 weeks and um we understood that there was something wrong, and then sort of that process of understanding and one not knowing, and I'm blocking off all my emotions, and I'm trying to steel myself, steel my partner. These are all very common
Mhm.
for men. And then eventually when we find out, we're actually learning like that our baby would be unable to do anything for themselves, that they were essentially their brains hemispheres had never separated.
Mm.
And the doctor's prognosis is basically like, this is probably not going to make it to term, and if it does, it's unlikely to be very much longer after that. And so I remember talking to my wife deeply about like, hey, and we're very excited, obviously, and I think we just we were considering termination, and that was really hard to sit with. And then we went to the doctors, and they told us a strange relieving experience for them to tell us that the baby had passed and in the womb. And I remember hugging. Anyway, we were able to hug and be with what we were lucky to have in that situation. And then I came home, and we came home, and it was empty, and that was hard. And this was 7 years ago, and I buried that. My feelings. I took them, and I said, I'm not going to deal with this. I'm not going to be here with this.
Mm.
I can't. I cried, but then I was like, I can't do this anymore. We got to move forward.
Mm.
My wife, for me, what was so hard, and I think hard for a lot of the men, is like the difference in grieving styles.
Yeah.
It's one of our sessions, and I'll tell you a little bit how I got there. But
Yeah.
and I just didn't want to come home anymore. I didn't want to hear my wife grieving. It was nonstop for me, and I think for me, what's very clear to me now, after doing all my internal work, is that for me, it was nothing scarier than being this kind of vulnerable. And so to me, like the crying itself is, oh no, I'm not going to be vulnerable here. This is too much. And there was some tiny bit of wisdom here. I told my wife, like, we're gonna choose life. We're gonna choose like to keep going. And I think it was like a weekend, and I was like, I don't know if you know, like the kayak, like you search anywhere, like, and I'm like, okay, what can we afford? We like the cheapest flight to the furthest place, and we ended up having
Mm.
a fantastic trip to like Japan on like I don't know, I probably would never have taken that airline. I was like, I don't know it, but we're going. And
Mm.
I'm sharing that part of the story because like years later, when I decided like, hey, like there should be a place for men that have suffered perinatal loss, specifically in stillbirth and early infancy, I found through someone I did a podcast with about this. He's, again, just being a man in this space is so unique, and he's doing this work with couples in Florida, and he just guided me and mentored me, and he's written a couple books on stuff, and just took the time, and he told his story, told mine, and he was like, I did the same thing. He's like, I ran like hell. It's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
and I hoped that it would just go away. And he helped me. Probably one of the biggest nuggets of wisdom is that he told me that in my doing these groups was how I'm still parenting my first child here.
Yes.
Um, I had never considered that was what I was doing here. And just this idea of parenting your child, even though they're not alive. This is a profound thought, I think, for a lot of parents. He gave me like the outline to these 6 sessions. He was doing it for couples, and I just made it for men. And every quarter or so, I run it. And again, I have men mostly from this area, but I've
Yeah.
had people call from Canada, from South America. So it's really important that there's a space, and there's a lot of great spaces, a lot of that I was not willing to go to. I don't know that I
Mm.
tried even to look, which a lot of men don't want to. And I think the words I've heard from them is like, I'm just going to go there and tell my story, and it's going to be very disorganizing. Like, I just heard a lot of men say that. And I'm like, no, we're going to have a structure here. we're going to talk about what this is the topic, similar to how I run the other dad's groups. And I think I could just, again, see you settling.
Yeah.
And the men, it's like, no, okay, there's a path here. Eventually, they write a letter to their child. And it's definitely the most profound part of what we do. But I have to tell you that a number of guys are like, I don't think I'm going to do that. And then by the last session, so far, we're 100% for it. And I don't care if they do or not. I just tell them, if you want to share, but be witness, support others. And they're always willing. Yeah, so we cover a number of things, grieving styles, and a number of other things that are not coming to my brain because it feels like, geez.
I'm just sitting with that for a moment. I hope that's okay if I can just sort of land with that, because if I can name this piece of, the concern of like, I'm going to show up to a group and it's going to feel very disorganizing, that's a valid concern. I mean, I've attended group, it's been 14 years almost for me now, but I remember in the early days, in my early grieving days, I did attend a few groups that did feel very disorganizing. And I kind of left feeling like, am I going to relive that every time I go? And so I didn't go back. And what I'm really hearing from you and what you provide is a very organizing, internal organizing experience where they can process in a not just effective, I don't know if that's the right word, but in a way that is supportive of moving forward in a trauma-informed way. That's what I'm hearing. And that feels so vital and important because I don't know that that's always offered.
I hope what you're saying is true. And I also know that some of these couples work, and it's fantastic too. And a lot of the men that have come have talked about going there too and getting something out of it, but at the same time, needing another space or similar idea of, they're taking up room for, that their wife needs, or that they feel responsible if they were to take up that room. And then, I just remembered another, some of the curriculum, but one of them is that we bring in a doctor who's someone close to me and my wife who gave us his phone number, his personal cell phone as we went through what we went through. And he's a perinatologist. And he comes, and we do this at night, because sometimes people have kids. And a lot of these groups happen at night, by the way, 8:30 to 9:30 at night, Eastern. So the doctor will come and he's still at work. He's like he's just a hardworking guy. And he shows up and he answers the questions for the men. And it's so interesting because people have so many negative and sometimes positive, but negative experiences with the medical system in those moments. And I think part of that, and I talk about this in one of the sessions, is sort of like villains and heroes. Like that, we almost it's like we need someone to project some of this anger onto, as it is so much to hold. And I remember, we had someone, God bless her, she tried her best. She walks in and didn't know that we had lost. They have I'm sure you're familiar, the butterfly on the door when you've lost. And she walked in and she woke up my wife to give her something. This is in the middle of the night. And she's like, don't worry. It's no big deal. You have your child. You'll be, and it just and I remember just taking off and going in on these people and just being but I villainized her, but she was, it was 2 a.m. She's just a person, but we share those stories, and it's useful to be able to share and see that there's some patterns to what's happening here. So again, then you get to ask the doctor who's really empathic and present and say, hey, what's the chance that I would like to have another baby? And it's well, you know what? This is the real chances. He's a kind of an encyclopedia of, but ultimately, it's you have to decide. And he's that's what you're here to talk to Adam about. So we kind of complement. So that's nice. And again, this is ideas of my colleague who mentored me and supported me.
Again, I'm just feeling into the gratitude of the work that you're doing. And so you talked about creating these spaces coming out of 2020. And I'm just thinking back, my own experience of 2020, how disconnected I felt, from even just from my neighborhood. I felt like people weren't out in their yards. We were all kind of hunkered down, and how challenging that must have been for you, bringing home a newborn and then immediately feeling this disconnection. And I imagine that informed kind of how you built the groups. Can you share a little bit more about what these peer support groups look like and how you run those?
Yeah. So I'll go, maybe I can go through them quickly for each one.
Yeah.
with the 10-session new dads groups, the men are coming in just like essentially intentionally looking for a network. So they're actually looking for friendships, as opposed to, say, the therapy, we're intentionally not doing friendships.
Yeah.
So they're usually from the DMV area, and they're going to have a topic every session. So in the very first session, what we do is, we're just first getting connected, and then to talking about sort of their experience in the journey to have their child. But for many men, even this word journey, as I said it, I kind of smell, because a lot of women see it as a journey in a different way, whereas some men do. But a lot of men, if not all men, feel, like the point of really like to process is really from the birth. And so while there are men, I have a number of men in my area because for a number of reasons that have also experienced and had to go through IVF. So sometimes they bring that up. But essentially what we're just checking in with is like, how is it to get through that, And so what really usually comes up is sort of the process of having gone through birth. And what I want to make sure that people know, if they're not aware, is that men suffer a lot of post-traumatic stress after the birth. And I think it can be really dismissed outright because of, they're not the one, quote unquote, having the baby. And I want to just note that, like, there's a lot of things at play here. One, you have the medical system, which is really challenging to navigate. Even if everyone does a great job, it's just hard.
Yeah.
Even if there's no complications in the pregnancy, it's still painful and new, and all these decisions. And then you have the responsibility, which I think you'll recognize from a NARM language, like where our fathers will take or allow in all this responsibility on themselves for the pain that their partner is experiencing. And I think that makes a lot of sense as it lines up with the protector part of what comes up for a lot of men in terms of what we see as part of our role. And it's not that I don't think we should negate and say, like, that's not what you should do, but it's to notice the difference between what you can, as and what is just, harming you from what you're wanting. And so just thinking about that and being that with the guys, I've just worked through so many, processing the birth with so many men. And it just so happens that my trauma was around our loss, but the two living children that I have, we happen to have very good, and then again, I just want to say that, like, even when there's no complications, a lot of men feel like, and I remember watching my wife getting her epidural and just feeling like so uncomfortable watching that. And some men even get removed from the room. I don't know if people are aware of that, because there's some rules in certain hospitals, especially around that point. And then of course, if there are complications, just thinking about the loneliness and the helplessness, really is the word I'm looking for, when your partner and potentially your child is being wheeled off to do what's considered to be like somewhat normalized, like cesarean. And so it's just like, and what about those moments? And so I've had guys which kind of be frank, just surprised me, who broke down in the first session. And that doesn't happen regularly, but it did a few times. And I'm like, just like, there's no space. And I think the way that men, again, putting this on themselves, they don't feel that they can take the space because their partner has done so much and continues to do so much. And so for us, there's so many pieces at play here, but they're really wanting a separate space where they can just share what's really going on for them.
Yeah.
And that's true at every one of these workshops when we talk about, the postpartum mood and anxiety disorders and thinking about for your partner and for yourself. When you're talking about, how you're reacting to the friends and your identity changing and your parents and your, in-laws and so on and so forth. And we go through each session and there's always like overlap and people and those are the good ones, right? It's like just kind of just flowing here, right? But yeah, we get to different topics, eventually coming to family of origin material, which if we haven't already talked about, we end up talking about it towards the end. And thinking about going forward as we're ending these 10 sessions, we do a rites of passage program, kind of like a protocol, which is like, just thinking about what it is they're committing to themselves, to each other as men, and to their partner, and to their child. And so just, this is something I pulled from the nonprofit world, So just that's essentially the 10-week sessions. And then the therapy, I think, where we're just seeing whatever comes up. These are guys with kids from all ages. Most of those people are from, early to the baby just being born to all the way to usually 5 or 6. Those are the majority of guys in the therapy group. So we have a few that have older kids, and they like it too. It's just that space again to like process. One of the dads said, I like this place because I get to dump in here and not, and I'm always being told that there's no space, that I have to dump out.
Yeah.
So this is my place to dump in.
Yeah. Yeah. While you were talking, my heart just kind of cracked open this piece about, well, even just this last thing that you said about men feeling like this is a place that feels safe for me to share openly about what's really happening. And I get a sense that maybe even some of these practical pieces that you're talking about can really feel emotionally charged. They might seem insignificant, and really they're not. They hold so much weight there. And that's what I'm really hearing, is that you're providing a space for them to bring all of themselves, all of their experience, and how beautiful that is. Yeah.
Yeah. To your point, like, we have a session on sleep and a session on feeding.
Yeah.
But like, of course, there's some interest in the education, and then like they're appreciative of those pieces. But it's like, hey, this is just hard. This is just really, and I was about to curse because that's what usually happens. Like, this is really hard.
Yeah.
and like, and hey, maybe my partner has a completely different view of what is needed here. And, is that okay to like have like a different view? And like, there's a lot of that. I'm actually creating something, and it's gonna be in person. So,
Yeah.
your earlier question about bridging the parenting styles, because I think this is really about like, hey, like what's enough, and all this pressure and this kind of this overcorrection, for lack of a better word, in parenting. It's not that I'm a Dr. Becky fan. I'm very thoughtful with my kids, and also like sometimes I put too much pressure on myself. Sometimes I just need to be with like, hey, like I can't do anything about it, and this is as good as I can do right now, and there's some grief there. And so that's part of what we're doing too. It's just like, hey, this is hard for you, and it's not supposed to be done with two people. And some people are like, oh, I feel lucky being two people. I'm like, but like by the end, we're like talking about why don't we have a community to raise kids in? And, Brad and I have talked about, or I've heard him speak about, sort of the generational trauma that has separated us from the wisdom and the support that we've needed in parenting. And I think that we're just trying to learn so much as we do. And what do they say? Like you're riding the bike while building it, right? Something like that. Yeah. And meanwhile, you're sleep deprived, your partner's trying their best in their own view, and you're having conflict with them too. So it's a lot to feel compassionate about.
Yeah, that disconnection from community, and from, in many cultures, there's so many generations living in one home so that they can support each other in their different kind of seasons, and how we have really become disconnected from that in so many ways. So that's like another layer of trauma that folks are experiencing.
To your question about complex trauma, that is definitely a part of it. Absolutely. I don't know, my brain's flowing, but just thinking about all the things that people don't expect men to have in these situations, or to be struggling with. I talked to a number of men that just are like, I want to run. I want to run. These are what we call intrusive thoughts, right? And it's like when I had guys share that with other guys in the group, one sort of half the group was like, my partner is having intrusive thoughts. The other half, I'm having intrusive thoughts. And it was really important for them to hear each other. And the compassion that was there.
Oh, gosh. Again, my heart is just feeling so much gratitude for this work that you're doing, because it's like naming it and feeling in community around it, how powerful that is. Wow. I wonder if you would share with us kind of in our remaining minutes, if you have any, other stories or, examples of struggle that have helped you in dealing with complex trauma, maybe.
I think what I'm working to clear up and for myself is like the themes that are showing up as parents. And so thinking about like, there are parents that are doing so much, and there's this efforting, which, you're familiar with, that this pressure they're putting on themselves to be something, to take care of everything, to make sure. And really what we end up doing in the work, of course, is noticing what the reason they show up tends to be anxiety, and I also want to offer that it tends to be this presentation may be the kind of father that shows up for therapy, right? And so like even holding like that may be, there's some a number of dads that are showing up differently and have other challenges. And I have some examples for those too. But in terms of like the efforting, which tends to also be a majority of women that are doing that for good reason because of the messaging, cultural messaging, and there's no blame, obviously, but just like that's how it shows up. Just noticing with them what they're really wanting, usually like, tends to be confidence, calm, all these things, and when we're present with that and then noticing it and just the grief of like, I can't do everything and my kids are going to suffer. There will be some suffering here. And that realization is a big part of being a good parent, being with it, being able to be with that. Mm-hmm. And I think in a group, that's even more supported, when that's present with each other. And like I said earlier, the dynamics that happen between people are really like both of them having these individual experiences and then, not negotiating or being willing to be with the grief because it's really triggering of what they experienced when they were younger, whatever it is that was lacking in the environment that shows up in the fear of, which for a lot of men is the vulnerability. Understandable, especially when we are punished for being vulnerable. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and I'm holding that there are differences. I believe that of course, there are generalizations that I'm making, but like, even if it's true, if you side on the side of like, oh, it's all cultural or all developmental or, social versus biological, it's still the truth that here, if someone is wanting a different experience, how can we be with this? Yeah, some men don't want to be with their emotions as much. Okay, so we'll take more time in other spaces, and then sometimes emotions will come up too. And I think what I've just been so lucky to have the support in NARM is to be able to be vulnerable for myself, because that wasn't easy to crack to see my crack and keep pulling those cracks open and to be vulnerable for myself, because it's hard. It's hard to be vulnerable with other men, for a lot of men, including myself. Yeah. And so just being able to do that more and more. And then, of course, if we can't give other people where we can't go. And so that's been the change in my work. Yeah, I have so many, I think, heroic stories of parents nonstop. And those give me my own part in my own life such a push, and I think, when I have the dad he's more on the levels or towards the narcissism side of things, just sharing that like I care about them here and in certain moments when it's appropriate. That's like, I'm not just here because I get paid or something. I have some idea of that, it's just I'm here with you. You know what I mean? Like, for a reason, because I care about you. It's just what it is. That holding that and the value of each one of us just inherently is at the core of I think not just men, of course, and everybody, and that they're okay. So just be there. They're enough. So that's been a lot of a lot of the work that I think all of us have done.
Yeah, I'm just hearing you name that, the human connection piece.
Yes, absolutely, the relational part of this.
Yeah,
this work.
I so appreciate the work that you're doing, and I wonder if you have any kind of final words to leave with our listeners. Anything that feels important?
I think just that if you're, for clinicians, I think NARM's doing enough, so I don't need to tell them what to do. I think they're doing fantastic work. And for parents, I think we've said a lot here of like how to be compassionate for themselves in the process as they notice what comes up for them. And it's nothing like having a kid to show you all the things, to show you all the things, and have a space to more and more creating your community. I think this is sort of outside of our NARM work here, but like part of what I'm trying to do also is figure out how do we create more of a community that's deeper, right? That demands more of each other, through friendships, sort of a chosen family, and thinking about how to bring people in intentionally. So I've been working on thinking about a communal parenting and so on and so forth. So maybe there was something forthcoming for you. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's so great. Well, how can listeners get in contact with you and the work that you're doing?
So for the dads groups, and I would say dadswithwisdom.com. So dadswithwisdom.com. And then for the therapy individual or perinatal loss groups, or the Dads 2.0, which is the therapy groups, you can go to adamangeltherapy.com.
Great. And we'll put those in the show notes so that folks can easily access your work. Adam, thank you again. You've been so generous with your time and your heartfulness. I appreciate you sharing so vulnerably and cracking my heart open a little bit too. And yeah, just really appreciating you and the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more about our guest and their work, check the show notes or visit us at narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. If you're a licensed mental health professional working with complex trauma, we're excited to share with you about our upcoming NARM therapist trainings. Level 2 training is a clinical training where you will get trained in a comprehensive developmental framework and clinical approach for resolving the long-term impacts of ACEs and CPTSD. You will receive individualized support from a team of skilled and supportive trainers led by NARM senior faculty Brad Kammer. Learn more about this training or reserve your spot by visiting www.narmtraining.com/schedule. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community, connection with you, and changing the world by transforming trauma.